afternoon, and welcome to the Alonso Says Show. Today's show is going to take on a deeper tone, a more meaningful discussion today. I'm your host, Alonso. Today's topic we're going to be speaking about is an epidemic that's starting to become a real big issue in this country. And until it's addressed, it'll only get worse for all people involved. The topic we're going to be speaking about is the situation in the civil unrest in Ferguson, Missouri. As you all have probably been looking at the news and internet feeds, you actually found out about a resident by the name of Michael Brown, which was an unarmed teen that was shot by Officer Darren Wilson a few weeks back. There was a funeral for him, which was like 4,500 people gathering there to pay their respects and also speak about the continual injustice of police brutality and unjust force. Now, I think a lot of people, they get it mixed up. A lot of people feel like, okay, well, whenever these officers are killing an unarmed teen or unarmed black male, that each time they was in some way or form, in some way, shape, or form, aggressive toward them. Now, it's clearly a problem in terms of how you go about arresting these individuals. Now, I find it very hard to believe that with an officer having a billy club, mace, a stun gun, and even a gun that he can shoot in his leg, that their tactics have not been taught differently. And I do believe that when you start taking a look at the way that they approach black males and the way they approach white males are completely different. Rarely will you ever see them having to where they're going to sit there and shoot unarmed white citizens down the street like a dog and then have an internal investigation to get away with it. Rarely will you ever see, unlike if you go on YouTube and you'll find a videotape of a California Highway Patrolman sitting there punching a black woman on the side of the road in broad daylight, punching her like she's a man while she's laying on the ground. Will you ever see a white woman in that position? Most of the time when you see that is when they're maybe occupational movement or something of that nature. But very rarely do you see that happening where it's a continuing problem. And that's what we need to discuss today. You basically had this young man who there's different accounts of what happened in the situation where this young man was walking down the street, in the middle of the street, him and his friend, when Officer Wilson pulled over to tell them to get out of the street. And through his account that he went for a struggle for his gun. Now, the problem I have with that is that the moment that the officers, the department released a video of the officer's name on that Friday, they also at the same time released a videotape of Michael Brown supposedly robbing a convenience store of cigars. Now, clearly that was strategy. That was character assassination if you ever seen it. Now, you're not going to tell me that at the time it's coincidental that the timing of freedom of information that journalists were asking, they decided to do that day. That was clearly to assassinate this young man and to put him out as an aggressive individual, which is probably one of the most prominent moves that most police officers do when they're sitting there shooting an unarmed black or selling or minority. There's just too many different instances where this is going on. You take a look at New York, where the young man was sitting there supposedly selling Lucy's on the corner, and then someone caught on videotape this officer using a no-no move with his baton and cut off this guy's breathing passages and killed him. Now, to me, that was unnecessary force. You take the BART station situation where this young black male was handcuffed with his hand behind his back, and somehow or another the officer still shot him. He said, I thought he was going for a gun, even though his hands were behind his back and he was handcuffed. Well, he was resisting, so we thought he was going for a gun, even though the young man was handcuffed. These are tactics that must be addressed. The only way that you're going to start to have any post-racial harmony is when a big portion of America decides to actually confront the situation without passing on and say, well, that's their racial problem. They're always trying to play the race card. It's easier for those individuals to make that assessment when they don't have to live that situation of being racially profiled for no reason, being unjustly pulled over, being targeted, whether that's going in the stores or the malls or walking through a neighborhood, i.e. Trayvon Martin. And each time that each one of these individuals, if something happens to them, then they start to go back in their past about something that had nothing to do, like for Trayvon Martin, when they sit and spoke about where he used to smoke drugs and get in trouble in school. None of that had nothing to do with the day that he walking and minding his own business with his Skittles and tea. None of that has any inkling about the fact that he was shot unarmed. And here we are with Hernandez getting away with it. Nothing had something to do with Michael Brown. Nothing had something to do with that day when this young man was sit there and shot 6 times. You're not going to tell me that you need 6 shots to apprehend anyone. With all the different access to tasers and billy clubs and guns, as I stated, and backup, there was no need for him to be shot 4 times through his torso and 2 times in his head. That was excessive if I ever seen it. And that's because you have a block. Now, this isn't a sweeping indictment on all police officers, because there's some great police officers, black and white, that go out there and do their job every single day. And all they want to do is just get home and get to their family. And treat you with respect like a man, just like anybody else. You have belligerent people who's going to try cops just because they just being pure asses. But that's of every color, not just black men. But then you have a segment of rogue and dirty and corrupt cops that hide behind their badges and do the most dirtiest deeds to the African American community, because they already have a mindset when they rolling in there about the people in general. And what thickens me is that when you have those demonstrators who sit and say, well, we're here to show Darren Wilson that we fully support him, their former officer families and stuff, you be put in that situation where your son is killed and he's unarmed, and see if you come out with the same results. Sure, you have some officer who's doing their job, but don't you sit and tell me that there's not time for people to now to go back in and start to re-examine the tactics and the training that these police officers are trained to do when they're in the black neighborhood, or you need these military riot gears. Now, you're going to have a bad apple in the bunch, I don't care where. And they tried to make the people, those thugs, and people who sit up throwing bottles and becoming confrontational with the officers in the midst of the peaceful protesters. They tried to make them the face of it, and then they wind up sitting there arresting innocent individuals, journalists and stuff, journalists that they would never sit and do that to if they was at a Tea Party protest. And you've seen all kind of stuff at Tea Party protests, where they're sitting there getting belligerent with the public and everything, but they don't arrest them. They allow them to have their peaceful protest. But you have people out there who had rebel flags and bringing racial chants and posters and everything, and they wasn't arrested. They was allowed to demonstrate. And the same should be afforded to the African American community. You know why these people continue to get together and sit there and protest? Because they're sick of it. And most Americans should be sick of it as well. Most people ask is to be treated on the same accord. And there's clearly a discrepancy on the way that people of color is pulled over and profiled and unjustly having their civil rights violated. Now, I want you all to go on. I'm going to have a link that you can click on where this officer, who happens to be a 17-year vet for the LAPD, which that make me shake my head, and he's also an instructor of Homeland Security over at Colorado Tech. And this individual had the audacity to state, if you don't want to get shot, shut up and just do as I say. Even if that means I'm violating your civil rights, you have to go on and read this statement that this guy made. This is just a minor scope of the bigger problem that we're facing as a nation. Not only is just minorities. When you having officers like this, who's a veteran, who's over other individuals, who's teaching them this poison pill. Or a St. Louis cop over there by the name of Matthew Pappert, who alleges that the people should be shot down like rabid dogs. I guarantee you if it was a white protesters that he wouldn't say something of that nature. That gives you the mindset of what these people feel about people of color. And don't you sit and say that all people of color is all of a sudden they're bad individuals, because that's a bald-faced lie. There's some individuals who come in there and they abide by the laws, and you're still gonna be targeted. And you have just big racial peddlers like Fox News, like Bill O'Reilly and Ann Coulter. And I'll give Meg Kelly at least credit over there, that she at least admit that there's white privilege. It is. And it's based on structure. It's based on institutional racial problems. This is institutional policies that are being enacted every day, that's right before your eyes. Now it's, people say, well, racism don't exist anymore. It's post-racial harmony, and it's not. When you see invisible things that African Americans and men of color deal with on an every single day basis, it becomes tiring. And when you don't have to deal with those situations, then of course you're going to be somewhat indifferent to the plight that men of color and the African American community or the minority community as a whole is going through. Now, you have African Americans who stay in those areas who wouldn't do you no harm, wouldn't bother you. They happen to be in a very poor situation. And you have to have individuals in there who's looking for trouble no matter what. But you can go to real good areas, real suburban areas, that there's white individuals who would never bother you. Wouldn't bother you, would treat you like gold and treat you like the man that you want to be treated like. And then there's also some that don't want you there just based on the fact of your color and based on their ignorance. You take a lot of these people like conservative bloggers, those people over there at Fox News, have these people, they take their notions and their assumptions based on news feeds and white constituents. None of them has ever sit down with a group of African American community leaders and people and seen their side of the story. They form their own opinion and then say this is the way it should be. And I'm calling for action for people to continue to demonstrate, because a lot of these vigils and marches are good, but they're not creating any kind of laws or proposal or initiatives that will curb this onslaught of violence against men of color. And it's a problem. There's a consistent miscommunication problem that's been existing right now, right before your eyes. If you take a look across the country, it's just a sweeping problem. Now you have some people say, well, what about black officers killing white people, white teens? How often do you hear that? Now, I don't justify any cop shoot any unarmed person. I don't care what color you are. If the investigation showed that he was at fault for it, then he should be punished accordingly to it. No different than a white officer should. But it's funny to me that it's a footnote, a minuscule, a needle in a haystack of you reading or hearing about black officers shooting unarmed white individuals. It's almost a non-existent situation. But they'll take a cherry pick one and say, oh, this is an epidemic too. But it's not. No, it's not. And then you go to those facts, and you continue to keep coming back with facts and showing that each time these individuals have an internal investigation and they're cleared of it. And it makes it more and more frustrating for people of color that they realize that they don't have a law on their side. So I'm calling for action for all Americans. I don't care who you are, to stand beside individuals. Because if that's your son or your daughter who's being shot, would you feel the same way that African Americans feel that they deal with every single day? Those African American teens and other individuals, they're brothers and sisters of mine. And I feel that pain the moment that they feel that pain. And you should too. Because through all this situation with Trayvon Martin, with the gentleman in New York, and now with this situation with Michael Brown. No one stops on Fox News and these other places and these conservative blogs and stop and say, this was somebody's child. So I have at least a feeling on that end that I feel sorry and I pray for this family. What they do, they go off and automatically start attacking black individuals. Oh, it's a race problem. They just institution the race problem because these peddlers, this is how they make their money. This is how they get their ratings. Because they appeal to a certain segment of society that's just as prejudiced as they are, and they just tell them what they want to hear. They're their mouthpiece. But I can guarantee you most of these individuals that support that never had a run-in with an individual, a black individual, every single time, and he did something to them. I guarantee you that these same individuals have had problems with other white individuals, and they haven't had the same issue. They can take the same position. So I'd like for you all to give me feedback on my Facebook, Twitter, or right here on Yahoo, on my Yahoo or my YouTube channel. And let's start a discussion about changes that needs to be made from the top down to the bottom with Eric Holder, the Department of Justice, because that's his job, America. Whether you like it or not, that's his job. And a lot of them say, well, he's pulling the race card in both ways. You can't sit and say one thing, oh, we don't want you to do anything about it. But when you do something about it, we're going to create it as a racial situation as opposed to you doing your job. What better person than sit there and relate to these situations than a man of color himself who's probably went through the same situation as far as racial profiling and unjust civil rights violation. Now I think at the end of the day it's time for people to start to work together and start having a general, real discussion, not pushing up on the rug. Have a real discussion about the racial issues and problems that we have in this country. That's the only way we're going to move forward. For everybody here at the Alonzo Says Show, have a good afternoon. Please subscribe and feedback, and we'll be discussing another issue next week right here on the Alonzo Says Show. Have a good afternoon.